like, my dad was in there for a while, like a while. For a few months, my dad was in there. I think he kept saying he was in there for like 6 months. So my dad served his time, okay? My dad had to do anger management after. It was part of his conditions to be released. And at this point, my sister was taken out of the home. And the reason why she was taken out of the home is because me and my mom would show up at the school with bruises. And the school knew that it was bruises for my sister. Okay? They had mentioned to my mom that if you and Morgan come to this school with bruises one more time, I will have to report it, and I'm going to call her Emma. Emma has to go into the foster system, and she has to be placed in a foster home. And because of my sister's mental health issues, my mom knew that that was not the best place for her. It was going to be very bad for her. So my mom gave her mother partial custody. My mom wanted to get custody back. My mom wanted to put her on the straight and narrow and get her situated. We were already starting to plan to move back to Ohio at this point. We were literally getting things set up. Then, before we knew it, my mom's dad sued for sole custody. And we lost custody after that. And my sister and her mental health went downhill after that. So my dad served his time. My dad got out. My dad did community service. He did all the things he was supposed to do. Okay. We get back to Ohio, and we end up going to stay with my grandparents, which are my dad's parents. And they live in Chippewa Lake, in a small 3-bedroom house. And we stayed with them for a few months or weeks or something until we found a house. And then by this time, I'm like 5 years old. We're moving into the new place. And I remember being 5 years old, sitting in the living room watching Little Bear. I believe I was watching Little Bear at the time. And my dad, it was early in the morning. It was like around 9 in the morning, I think. And my dad came in from doing something outside, and he sits on the couch, he picks up the flipper, and he just starts changing it. Okay? And all I was thinking is, you didn't ask. You just came in here and you're starting to take over the TV. That's all I was thinking. And then the next thing I knew, I had said to him, "Hey, I was watching that." I was 5, okay? And my dad said, "I don't care. I'm changing it. I don't want to watch it. If you have an issue with it, you can go complain to your mother." And my mom was in the kitchen at the time. So I decided to just go ahead and go to the kitchen, and I told her. And I ended up being sent to my room. And this was like 98 or 99. So between 1998 and 1999, we moved into this place, and each house we called it a specific name to remember it, because like Helms is the house I'm talking about, okay? And it was the last name of the landlord. So we called it Helms. My dad ended up getting injured when I was about 6. Helms had, it was like a duplex. So it was like a main floor house kind of thing, and then an upstairs house type thing. And we were upstairs. And it was winter time, and my dad had went down the stairs, and at the bottom of the stairs was some black ice. And my dad got hurt. He fell and he like hurt his hip. And then before we knew it, we were kicked out of there. My dad was staying with his brother, and that was also, his house was also in Chippewa Lake. And then my mom's parents' house was in Brunswick at the time. So me and my mom stayed with her parents and my older sister. And it was like that for a few weeks, it felt like. My dad would refuse to stay there. He refused, completely refused. Within this time frame, my dad had already offered me a sip of my first beer at 5, okay? I had really bad insomnia at that age, really bad insomnia, and I was up all the time. Well, at this point, I started going to school. So I was really tired. We were standing outside waiting for the school bus. I was so tired. I just remember standing there and like dozing off. I was so tired. And 7 something in the morning, my dad had just got off his 3rd shift, work shift, came home. First thing he do, he takes a shower, he eats, and then after those 2 things, he grabs a beer. He had a cooler for it, one of those slip-on cooler things. But I just remember telling him, I am so tired. And the bus felt like it was taking forever. And he goes, here, take a sip of this. It'll wake you right up. And I said, ew, no, I don't want that. And I didn't do it. I went to school. My dad was always short-tempered. It was like I was annoying him. That's what it felt like. It felt like I was annoying him. I was irritating him. Everything I was doing was wrong. It wasn't right. And honestly, forever, I thought I was the problem. That, or I always thought, did he want a boy? Is he treating me different because I was a boy? But then I'm thinking, if I was a boy, I would still have these mental health issues. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit to about 9 years old, okay? By 9 years old, we lived in this next house because once we got kicked out of Helms, we were waiting to move into another place. And this place was called Dukers. It was closer to where my grandparents lived. Back in like, I can't think of the word. It was almost like an outlet. Like, you know, when you drive into a neighborhood and there's just all these homes and you're like turning and all that. It's like that kind of thing. I can't think of the word. I'm sorry. And once I got to be about 8 or 9 years old, my dad's drinking got worse. He started drinking more and more. And I was the one that was asked to go get it 9 times out of 10. I was always asked to go get him cigarettes. Can you get me a pop? Can you get me a beer? You know, whatever. There were very few times that my dad and I sat in the same room and actually had a positive experience. There was so much annoyance and frustration with me. And now that I am older and I can look back on it, it just seems like my dad was very overwhelmed all the time. My dad was very overwhelmed with life, with the world, with people. And my dad didn't like how people were perceiving things, how they were perceiving life, how they were living. My dad lived his life like a Buddhist. He believed in reincarnation and a bunch of things like that. And my dad would get very angry, like if there was a lot of like garbage out on the floor, because he would be like, people are destroying the planet. Why can't people pick up after themselves? How hard is it to just pick this up and throw it away? How hard is it to switch to, what was it? How hard is it to switch to green, solar powered things, all that kind of stuff. And then when I got to be about a teenager, it's like the older I got, the more my dad got annoyed a lot, which was very very frustrating. When my dad would say, "You can come to me about anything." No. There was a lot of negative experiences with that. My dad, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my dad went to an old friend's house. It was a family friend. It was somebody he and my mom have known for years. Probably for about 15 years at that point, I'd say. He was at a friend's house and he got too drunk and he couldn't drive home. And my mom woke up and saw that my dad was still not home yet. And she started freaking out. She did. She started freaking out. And I can remember this day pretty clearly, okay? She called a family friend. Family friend says he left already. I don't know where he's at. And then at around 9:30, 10 o'clock, or maybe a little bit later even, my dad showed up back home. But before he showed up back home, my mom was so stressed and so upset that she chugged half a beer. And my mom didn't like beer. She still don't. But she was so stressed out. Her nerves were shot. She chugged half a beer. She's like, I can't. And I remember being 7 or 8 years old or so. And I remember asking, because I started getting scared. I started getting scared at this point. And I told my mom, I said, what if he's in a ditch somewhere? Like, I started freaking out. I remember freaking out really bad. And she goes, don't say that. And then I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You know? Sorry guys, I'm just checking out this. Not that yet. About. Alright, we're gonna do number 4. Sorry guys, I'm chatting and I'm trying to do my diamond art. I just don't want to screw up my diamond art. Number 4 is at, okay. there were moments where, I went to a thing at one of my schools I went to, and it was breakfast for dads type thing. There was breakfast, like donuts and eggs and sausage and coffee and orange juice and milk and just like this big blown kind of feast looking thing, and a movie. And I was so excited because the movie that they had picked out was right up my dad's alley. And when my dad was out in public, my dad didn't show his anger. And when my dad didn't show his anger, he was nicer, more patient and stuff. He was more fun to be around. And also, I didn't get to see that side of him very often. So there was a thing at this breakfast for dads that we got to do. We got to take a picture with our fathers. Every child who went got to take a picture of their father, with their father. And I remember sitting on my dad's lap, 6 years old or less, and I had my eyes closed. Try not to get emotional about it, but it's an emotional thing for me. But I remember wishing that day would never end. I remember sitting there wishing that day would never end so my dad could be like that forever. So, that it's moments like that I had very few of growing up. But whenever I saw that glimpse, it was something I wanted so much more. That in my childhood, from about, I think I was about 8 or 9 years old, all the way up until now, my favorite show is Seventh Heaven. Now, if you ever have watched Seventh Heaven, it's a mom and a dad. I mean, forget the religious part. My family is not religious, not in that aspect anyway. And yes, they had their issues. Yes, they had their arguments. Yes, they had their disappointments, their issues. Every family does. But the way the father would get short-tempered and then turn around and apologize and admit where they did wrong and be calm and respectful about it and apologize for what they did, to make the relationship better, was something I had always wanted. I always wanted the close relationship with both of my parents, not just one. And I never got that relationship with my father. Mine and my father's relationship was much more difficult than that. So, after that picture, we were eating, and then they had announced that when you're done eating, we're about to start the movie, so you can go in there and watch it when you're able to. And I remember being so excited because all the other fathers got to do it. All of them. But my dad wanted to get home because he had work that night. But the problem was that this breakfast for dads, breakfast with dads, was in the early morning. My dad had just gotten off work. He had cleaned up and changed, and we came to the school for it. But my thing was, my dad didn't really lay down to go to sleep until around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This event was going to be over before noon. It was going to be over around lunchtime. It was like right before lunchtime. It was over. And I didn't understand why he had to hurry and get home. Why he couldn't just stay and have that time with me. And then he had left, and I was sitting there at the cafeteria table finishing my donut. And then I remember walking into the auditorium by myself, and they had these square pieces of carpet back then, okay? And I sat down, and then I just see all the other kids with their fathers sitting there enjoying the movie. And the movie that they were playing was The Lost City of Atlantis. It was right up my dad's alley. My dad was into all that stuff. And I just remember sitting there watching it and crying. I couldn't enjoy the movie. I don't even remember what I really saw. And I remember sitting there and crying, wishing that he could still be there, wishing, why can't he be? And then that day was over, but the memory's still there. Then growing up some more, when I got to be about 8 or 9 years old, like I said, my dad's drinking got worse, a lot worse. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. It got worse again. We moved again. This time we moved to Medina County. And I started 6th grade. My dad's drinking just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and his demeanor kept getting worse and more negative. And at this point, as a teenager, my dad would get so angry at me that he would be this close to my face, just screaming at me, okay? I have horrible separation anxiety. I'm extremely close with my mom. Me and my mom are extremely, connected. We're like this. To the point where my mom would joke around, I swear your dad cut the umbilical cord. I watched him do it, The cord does split. She would joke with me all the time. But nobody ever realized how much my mom truly helped me. My mom has always had a way of communicating and getting things that are hard for me to understand and rewording them in a way for me to understand. My mom helps me stay on task. My mom helps me raise my daughter. My mom and I just love talking and being with each other. It's just a thing, But My dad didn't like how close we were. And when I turned 18, I think when I turned 18, my dad realized that there was something going on in their relationship. But what the thing is I don't think he understands that this is something that had been going on for a really long time, and it had been happening for a while. It wasn't anything I did. But, you know, when I was a teenager, my dad's drinking got to a point where it was so bad that my mom and I would have to drag him in from the garage because he was so drunk he passed out. Try doing that at 14, 15, 16 years old because your dad drank so much that he passed out in the garage. And you have to help bring him in because your mom can't do it by herself. That's pretty bad. When your dad drives after drinking, that's like, come on. Like, that's bad. And it just kept escalating. And when I got to be 18, 19 years old, my dad flat out told me that I need to move out. He didn't understand why I was still at home. He didn't understand any of it. I think that if I would have just left that day, my dad would have been happy. My mom would have been pissed. Seriously, my mom would have been pissed. And you can bet your ass my mom was probably gonna fucking say something. That's just who she was. That's who she still is. So, sorry, I gotta put in a new piece of wax, I think, because it's not working really for me. But, there, sorry. I'm trying to make these videos as short as possible, but these stories are so long and they have so much detail. So I will be putting them up in parts, so please forgive me. Okay. So, I didn't move out. I didn't. I was too scared to. I didn't like being alone as it is. It was just something I struggled with. And look at me now. 31 years old, and my mom lives with me. The house is in mine and my fiance's name, but my mom lives with me. And it just works that way. It does. It just works that way. And then when I was between 19 and 20 years old, my mom finally asked him for a divorce. And when my mom because he was out in the garage and my mom was in her room, and she texted him. She texted him and said, I want a divorce. She did. She flat out told him I want a divorce. And then the next thing I know, my grandma shows up, which is my dad's mom, asking my mother if there's somebody else, if they were having an affair, if there, something like that going on. But little did anyone know, my dad cheated on my mom the whole time they were together. So that means from about 1993 all the way up until 2014, November of 2014. So from 1993 until November of 2014. That whole time, my dad cheated on my mom on and off. So, yeah, there was so much that had happened in my life. It is insane. So once my dad left, there was still a lot of fear. I was so scared of him and his anger. And my grandma flat out asked me, "Don't you love your father anymore?" I said, "I love him." And then I started crying and I said, "But I'm tired of always being scared all the time." I did. I remember saying that to her. And then my dad left, moved in with my grandma. At this point, my grandfather had already passed. My grandfather actually passed January 25th of 2014. So my grandfather literally passed the beginning of that year before my dad left. And then December 26th of 2014, my dad was rushed to our local hospital via ambulance because he had an infected tooth for several days prior, which my mom had told him several times to go ahead and get antibiotics. He didn't listen. She told him several times. He kept ignoring and didn't do it. And now I'm going to back up just a little bit. My dad got paid weekly, and we had a little over $1,000 to work with every week, okay? My dad would have rather had his beer and his pot paid for before bills and food was paid for, okay? At this point, because of my dad and his habits and the way he was, we had cable, we had water, electric, we had mortgage, and we had a car payment issue. All 5 bills had an issue. Cable got shut off several times. He got pissed off. Acted like my mom did it all on purpose, when in reality, either it was in the beginning of her fibromyalgia stage, which means she couldn't remember, she kept forgetting. Or 2, we didn't have the money to pay for it, because my dad would rather had his beer and his pot, okay? And then, before my dad left, not long before my dad left, the car was repossessed. The car was repossessed because we were so behind on the payments, and my dad refused to pay for it. So, the car got repossessed. Now, at this point, we live in a different house, okay? This one is the first house my parents ever owned. Like, owned, not rent, owned. They got a loan, they got mortgage payment, they did all that. They didn't keep up with the mortgage payment because either my mom forgot because of her fibromyalgia, or 2, which it was normally number 2, we didn't have the money to pay for it because my dad thought other things were more important. So then, not long after my dad left November of 2014, I conceived my daughter like November of 2015. And then March of 2016, my daughter is 6 months old, and we're being kicked out of the house. We have no car, we have nobody to help, we have no friends, no family, nowhere to go. Okay? And at this point, we have to make tough decisions. And with these tough decisions came with consequences. Consequences we did not want, nor we didn't want to deal with, we didn't want to be in it, none of it. After those issues cleared up, I ended up getting back in contact with my father because I wanted my daughter to know her grandfather. I didn't want one day to look back and be regretting that my daughter didn't meet her grandfather. So when I got back in contact with my father, mid-October, sometime in October of 2017. Okay? When I got back in contact with my father, it was different. He was different. It was weird. He was patient. He was understanding, respectful, kind, loving, and caring. And I'm sorry if I start getting emotional again. He was finally that father I wanted. He was that father I'd always wanted, and I got to see it. My daughter got to see it. My daughter got to see the true version of him. His true alignment of who he was supposed to be. At this point, we were staying in Mansfield, Ohio, which is about 45 minutes to an hour away from Medina. And at this point, those legal issues turned into consequences. There was probation and whatnot. My dad took me to and from probation. And he held my daughter all the time. And she used to pull on his beard and he would go, ah! And she would just giggle up a storm. It was funny. And then a month later, it was like a few days after Thanksgiving, so late November of 2017, my dad, from sometime in October when I saw him again, his stomach was swelled. It looked almost like a beer belly, but my father wasn't drinking anymore. My father never kept beer in the house. My father ended up going to AA meetings. I found an AA chip in my father's belongings after he passed. Now, because his stomach was swelled, I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I knew there was something wrong. And a few days after Thanksgiving, so late November of 2017, my dad woke up with a slight fever, and he was told if he ever had a slight fever like that, he had to go to the emergency room immediately. Well, we took him to the emergency room, and he just had a lot of issues. They were running tests immediately, MRIs, CAT scans, x-rays, everything, blood work. I mean, they were doing everything. From late November into early December, my dad was in the hospital for a couple weeks. sometime within that time frame, we learned that my dad was bleeding internally. Now, the hospital, ran all these tests and still couldn't find it. My dad was in the hospital for about 4 or 5 days before they actually found the bleeding. They tried doing two different procedures where they're just like cauterizing the area to get the bleeding to stop. It wasn't working. At this point, my dad was bleeding. Like blood was coming out of his rectal. And then on around December 11th, December 7th. Sorry, one more time. December 17th of 2017 at 11 something p.m. my dad went in for an emergency surgery. To try to stop the bleeding. Before we even got to the hospital, they had already started the surgery, and I was trying so hard. I was trying so hard to get to the hospital before he had to go back because I was worried I wouldn't be able to say goodbye. So, when I found out we got to the hospital after he had already went back, I was really upset because I just had this feeling. When we got there, we learned because it was me, my daughter's biological father, and my grandmother, and myself. We were sitting in my father was in the ICU at the time, and we were sitting in the waiting room to wait for him to come back from surgery. And then the doctor came into the waiting room and sat down. And I grew up watching Untold Stories of the ER and all kinds of medical shows like that. And when you see him sit down, it's usually not good. And she started to explain the surgery and the procedure and what they were trying to do. And then she said, she ended up saying that he flatlined. And then I started thinking, I didn't panic at first. I'm like, oh, well, did you get him back? Like, is he okay? You know? And she kept going on and explaining how the second they cut him open to do the procedure, he bled out. He bled out on the table. He was 49 years old. They gave him between 7 and 9 shots of epinephrine. And they tried to do CPR for over 45 minutes because they wanted to give him the best possible chance he could have. And unfortunately, around midnight or something on December 17th, my father lost his life. So he lost his life because the hospital was not communicating. One doctor said he could have food, one doctor said he couldn't. Neurology and gastroenterology was not communicating with one another. Nobody knew what one person was doing versus the other person. And there was a lot of conflicting treatments being happened. And because of this hospital's negligence, my father lost his life in reason. I guess the reason why I'm so upset